Hello and welcome to the 10th Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. We are delighted to have your company. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to leaders and elders past, present and emerging. Today's topic is Connecting with Our Future, a presentation and discussion from Telstra Labs, the group responsible for the future vision and technology roadmap of Australia's largest mobile network. We are joined by Innovation and Incubation Product Technologist David McKechnie and Data Insight Senior Analyst Rob Davies. First to Rob, who will take us through Telstra's current Internet of Things, connectivity and data analytics solutions and share with us practical examples of how the Internet of Things is now transforming such industries associated with agribusiness, logistics, asset tracking and water management. Rob, welcome and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Alicia.
It's lovely to have you joining us from Melbourne, so I'll hand over to you now and we can look forward to your presentation and then joining us at the end for some questions after David's presentation as well. So thank you very much.
Welcome everyone. As I said, my name is Rob Davies. I've been with Telstra Labs for 3.5 years. Prior to Telstra, I worked in the e-commerce and ad tech space. And I was really excited when I got the opportunity to come to Telstra to try and do something more significant than just sell you a new ad or a new product. And I'm happy to report that things that, we're actually beginning to create something incredibly significant. So my talk today, we're going to go into 3 areas. Just need to find my mouse pointer, which would be helpful. Firstly, we're a telco, so of course I'm going to talk about the network. Our network is not just about voice. Secondly, I'm going to talk about my area of expertise around the great challenges and opportunities that we're addressing with managing data with the Telstra Hub. And then finally, I'd like to talk about the types of outcomes that we can get out of combining the power of our network and of the Telstra Data Hub to create great outcomes for the environment, for the economy and for all Australians. But first, I'd like to talk about this apple. So a lot of the talks you'll have seen and everyone, what David will go through as well, that everyone has some really cool props in terms of robots and drones and flying cars and so on. But sadly, all I have is this apple. Now, this apple got from the supermarket. Quite often, it'll have a sticker on it, and the sticker will say Apple. It's really helpful. But imagine a future that's not too far away where I could pick up my phone and I could scan this apple and I could understand a whole lot about this apple. Because one of the things I've discovered about apples from the supermarket is very often you don't know what this apple is going to taste like until you actually bite into it. Now, imagine if you could scan your phone and actually understand everything that goes on around that phone, because most of that data is actually already available somewhere along the way. We could understand what seed strain this apple came from. We can understand the environmental conditions, the weather, what type of water was on it. Was it ethical, sustainable water? What types of chemicals were used on this apple, or lack of chemicals? Whether it was an organic, grown organically or not. We could understand. So my screen just went blank for a second. How it was transported, where it was kept, how long it was kept, what sort of conditions it was kept under, and even more importantly, how it tastes. Now that data is really nice to have as a consumer, but if we think about everyone involved and all the parties involved in actually getting this apple from the seed to my mouth, all those people could really benefit from understanding all the data that comes from there. So the retailer can obviously have better products that makes me as a consumer much happier, but the logistics company could use that data to optimise their supply chain so that they don't have to have as much storage. They can optimise on fuel. They don't have to build extra warehouses or distribution centres. The scientists who work on creating greater apple strains could understand how environment, storage time, and it can affect taste. The agronomists who advise the farmers can have a much better idea of how they can plan to produce better apples. And of course, the farmer, I mean, it's very important to them to actually start being able to get feedback all the way through to understand whether, when I bit into this apple, whether I liked it or not. Because that's a really important thing. Is that as a producer, is that you want to create very good produce for people to eat. Now, this can create a whole lot of other great outcomes for the country. When we think about it, we can use much better use of our natural resources. We can create better supply chains, and more importantly, we can create better tasting apples. So, as I said, let's talk a little bit about the network itself. So, most people think about the Telstra mobile network as providing voice and Netflix, or streaming data and so on, to be able for entertainment purposes, some sort of remote applications. But if you think about our network at two extremes, voice probably sits in the middle. There is what I'm going to talk about is the Nb-IoT network, or the narrowband Internet of Things network, and this is a software upgrade that we turned on our network a year or so ago, and that enables us to connect millions and millions of devices to our network. And through the magic of physics and mathematics, we're actually able to get a much further range. So an IoT device can connect to a tower much further away than your mobile phone. In fact, it's about 120 kilometres we can get from a tower to an IoT device, and that the Nb-IoT network can even support devices that are underground and using much less power. So we think we can, depending on the environment that we're in, we can get 50,000 devices connected to a tower at one time. And that network in place today covers about 4 million square kilometres. So it covers certainly all of the greater Bendigo area and the agricultural regions it surround it. The second topic that I wanted to talk about was all the complexities and opportunities with that data. So if we think about all those devices creating data, all of the consumers of that data, and the unique sharing scenarios of that data, it creates an incredibly tangled mess, as illustrated in this picture. Some of the things that you have to start considering about this is the ownership of the data, right? So the first thing that is obviously of great concern to Telstra and I think to the general public at large is privacy. So, like one of the examples, if we think about the apple travelling in the truck, is that we want to be able to identify where the truck is, but we don't want to identify where the driver is, because that would infringe the driver's privacy. Equally, we need to make sure that the data about that apple is only available to the person who, the parties could see it if it's commercially sensitive. So, like in the example with the truck, we want the apples that are going to Coles, that Coles can see where that truck is coming, so they can schedule how the loading bay is staffed. But we don't want Coles don't necessarily want Aldi or Woolworths to know when their delivery is coming, and vice versa. Another great example is when we think about wheat farmers, for instance, the harvesters, the soil moisture probes on the network provide lots of great information that can help scientists improve the productivity of the wheat farm. But we don't want the futures traders to understand what's the productivity of the wheat farm, because that can affect the price of the grain that the farmer can get. The other issue around once you have all of this data is how do you organise it? How do you find it? How do you make it easy to use? How do you make it easy to share? And finally, how do we turn that data into useful information? And then the last consideration when we start thinking about that data is how do we make it cost effective? So software engineers are expensive. Data storage and compute, although, is coming down, the actual quantity of data is going up. And data, compute and storage have not just a financial cost, but an energy cost. So being more efficient can actually save energy, which obviously impacts the planet. So how do we take something like that ball of mess and turn it into something that's neat? And that's the project that I've been working on. That's the Telstra Data Hub. And our goal with the Telstra Data Hub is to make consuming data from these devices and making it into useful things, as simple as making a phone call. So we obviously don't have time to go into all the technical pieces of it, but I'd like to just talk about some of the key principles that we've worked on when we developed this product. The first is that Telstra is just a custodian of this data. We don't own it. In fact, we can't even see it. The second piece is around that a key principle is that the owners of the data have full visibility and control over what data they share with who and for which purpose. And then there's a couple of other principles in terms of the technology itself. The first is to avoid moving the data around as much as possible, because as I said, that's a cost, an environmental cost, and a systems cost. And then the other piece is to actually do the compute on that data, how you look at that data as close to the data as possible, because that again improves performance and reduces costs. And so finally, my third point that I'd like to talk to is now just some of the outcomes that we get. So one of the sayings that we sort of have in data analytics, is that you start with the data, but it's about data, insights, actions, and outcomes. So it's all well and good to be able to have all those things, but unless you actually are able to affect change, then a lot of this stuff is mute. So I'm going to talk about a couple of examples that we have in real life running today. The first is in water quality. As you can understand, water is an incredibly important resource to Australia. It's an incredibly finite resource currently. Taking measurements of water quality in the past have been very expensive and very timely. Most water quality is done by hand, where a measurement is taken, it goes to a lab, there's some tests run on it, and then they're able to produce a report that shows water quality in place. Now, there's obviously a big lag on that piece. There are some automated water quality stations, but they cost quite a lot of money to install. If they're in remote areas, quite often you have to either build very expensive satellite uplinks or microwave backlinks to get that water quality data through. One of the projects that we're working on is called the Blue Spot, where we've built a $5,000 device that is solar powered, and you can just drop it into a river or into a bore, and that data now starts coming in real time. So this has some really impactful results, so in terms of being able to measure outflow from agriculture, where chemicals that go onto a pineapple plantation or sugar plantation, for instance. If that data washes off and gets into the catchment area of the Barrier Reef, for instance, that can affect the coral bleaching and nitrate build-up is also being associated with some of the problems that we're having with the reef. Now we're able to see that in real time. It helps the environment. It helps the farmer, because if chemicals are washing off, then that's money literally going down the drain for them. Another area where we're working on is in terms of hyperlocal weather. Weather is an incredibly valuable measurement for all sorts of things. So not just for the farmer themselves. If they put a weather station onto their farm, it helps them, but it's also very useful to their neighbours and vice versa. But it's also really useful for transport companies, for instance. Understanding whether there's going to be ice on the road can affect whether you send a truck, or whether you have to, what size of truck, or whether you would reroute it another way. Heat on railway lines can affect what speed you can run trains at. It has lots of uses in terms of renewables and energy, understanding how you can forecast what sort of energy you can get from solar and wind, but it also has much better equal value in understanding load. Is it going to be cold or is it hotter? Aircon's going to go on and off. That helps us manage our energy network far more efficiently. It's very useful in terms of aviation, particularly as we move to start working with drones. Drones are much smaller aircraft. They're much more affected by environment. Being able to understand in real time what's happening in weather is most powerful for them. It has implications for energy, for emergency services. Being able to understand in nowcasting which way prevalent winds are coming, what temperatures are going, can certainly help in terms of fighting bushfires. And of course, it has great value in terms of science. So that's the Telstra Weather Network is another project that we're working on, where the data has multiple value and implications for lots of different parties. We're also doing work in medical research. That's another area where lots and lots of data is being created and needs to be shared. Some of it can be very confidential, as you could understand, so it needs to be enforced. And transport, and most importantly, being able to create tasty apples. So David's going to talk now, start talking about the things in terms of vehicles and transport, because that's another world of volumes of data. But in terms of ownership, privacy, control, the Telstra Data Hub equally applies.
All right, well, thank you very much, Rob, for that wonderful presentation. The Internet of Things just gives us so many possibilities about the way we consume, the way producers grow our food, the way we look after our health and well-being. So it's a very exciting project that you're working on, and we look forward to continual developments in that field to, I guess, support all the ways that we can live and move about our community. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
All right. Next, we will be joined by David McKechnie, who will provide us with a futurist perspective into digital connectivity and what this means for us all, particularly in regional communities, and how we will be propelled into the future by mass connectivity of people, data and processes. He'll also seek to answer the question, is the internet a human right? David, welcome and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Alicia, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go from the low power Internet of Things that Rob had into, I guess, fully automated and online. So maybe we'll answer that question. I'm not sure. We'll see how we go.
It's a pretty big question, but I'm sure you'll do a wonderful job. So we look forward to your presentation, and I'll join both you and Rob for some questions at the end from our audience. So take it away. Thank you.
Fantastic. I guess one of the most important things I'm going to speak about today is the role of 5G, and certainly 5G has been talked about an awful lot, good, bad. It's certainly had heaps of coverage, and it's something I've been working with for a number of years, and it takes a lot of what Rob was just outlining in terms of the data that all of these things are going to be producing, but ramping it up a little bit. It's got higher speed, it's got lower latency, and one of the really interesting things about it is that it's been something that we've been working on really hard at Telstra for a number of years. I had the pleasure of running the very first live demo of 5G technology. That was run right here in Victoria back in 2016. So you can see there on the screen, that's the very first 5G site ever. And the van parked there is actually the first 5G mobile device that was used in Australia. The thing took up the entirety of the back of that Telstra Liney van. It was fascinating to be involved in that. But I guess we've been on this journey, and as part of that, 5G is sort of part of this broader arc that I'm going to speak to of what mobile communications has done in Australia. It's interesting to me that just after we'd run this project where we turned on the first test site, a year later in 2017, the then Department of Communication and Arts released a whole position paper about how 5G was going to be advanced in Australia, because it's looked at as this really important pillar, and the impact that it might have on innovation and productivity for all Australians might be really profound. And that was nearly 2 years before we had the first 5G mobile device from Telstra. And that's really interesting, because I don't recall similar position papers coming out about the rise of 4G, for instance. So I guess before I get into the detail of why 5G is going to be so important, and the way it takes the sort of low-powered Internet of Things and makes it the high-powered Internet of Things, it's interesting to look at that journey that we've been on with 4G and the way that it's transformed mobile communication and, in fact, society in a number of profound ways. And that's been going on for about the last 10 years. So what's happened over that last 10 years? Well, we found that mobile connectivity has now become really ingrained in everything that we do, so much more than ever, and it's going to continue to do that and change the way that we interact with the world around us. So Rob mentioned, digitally connecting, well, not maybe the apples, but certainly everything that interacts with the apples and collecting that whole data story around it. Now, in 2010, that might have seemed quite fanciful, but of course now with the sorts of technologies that we have available, that doesn't seem so far-fetched at all. Telstra launched our 4G network in 2011. The picture there you can see has a little grab from one of the first mobile devices. Actually, we launched with just little USB dongles, but that's off one of the first HTC mobile devices that showed that little 4G icon. And it's interesting, I was looking back at some of the press material that came out at the time, and we announced that typical speeds on 4G were going to be on the order of 40 megabits per second, and one of the killer apps was that HD video would actually be possible on mobile. So that's what 4G looked like in 2011. Of course, we didn't stop there, and I think that's plain. The bottom of this picture here shows a speed test from last year, and this is still on 4G. And that's showing that just last year we were able to do 20 times faster than that launch speed. So from 40 megabits per second, we're up at, 2 gigabits per second, 2,000 megabits per second. And that's still on 4G. And so I would say not is it only reasonable to watch some HD video on your phone. I mean, with those sorts of speeds on 4G, it's perfectly reasonable to be watching HD Netflix on your phone, to do some virtual reality on your phone, to do an awful lot of stuff on your phone that we certainly didn't contemplate when we first turned on 4G. It's even becoming more common to just directly have mobile connectivity integrated directly into your device. So you might now go and get a laptop that has a SIM card in it, and just have the ability to be online all the time. And again, that's another really kind of profound change from where we were 10 years ago. So I think it's fair to say that 4G was the technology that really brought us all online in a dramatic way. And so I guess the point is that while 5G, and looking forward from here, it's another change. It's really part of a broader change in society that puts mobile data in your pocket wherever you are. And I guess this kind of gets to that question of whether internet should be a human right. And I'm certainly not going to actually answer that in a direct way, because that's a really complicated thing. But the fact that we've got this ability to have, online access in our pocket, and that's something that we take for granted now, is a really important part of how we think about digital inclusion. And so it's really great to, I guess, work for a company like Telstra, where there is that investment in both regional communities and in the urban areas, and making sure that the connectivity has, some sort of Australian-wide footprint, that it's available to lots of people in lots of different places. Of course, in an extreme example, there are some jurisdictions around the world that have in fact made internet and broadband access a legal right for every citizen. Finland is a fascinating example, because again, in the last 10 years, we've had this shift into broadband connectivity being just this really ingrained part of everything that we do. Of course, in Australia, we have the National Broadband Network as the signature government program to address equitable access for the internet. But I think it's really important that we consider mobile services as a part of digital inclusion too. And there's a number of really good reasons for that. For example, companies like Snapchat do some surveys, and Amazon, of course, and they've been reporting for a while that the way people interact with their services, particularly if you go shopping online with Amazon, you use a mobile device first now. It's long gone the days where you might, go do your shopping in front of your computer. The way you do that is you pick up a mobile device and you do it. And so making sure that there's general access to that is a really important thing. Social media, of course, is another fascinating area. Once upon a time, Facebook was a very laptop and desktop-oriented experience, especially back in the days when it was focused at university and college campuses. But there's a picture there on the screen of what Facebook looked like, one of its earlier mobile incarnations. And it's got all of the key components that you see in that sort of app today, but it's not the sort of app that you're expecting someone to interact with first. It's kind of, and when you're mobile, you can go around. And so today, of course, we're in a situation where it's exactly the opposite, where you go mobile first, and then if you've got something more difficult to do, that's where you might go to a laptop or another fixed device. Of course, the most obvious example in all of this, and the change in the way we interact and communicate with each other, is the rise of mobile telephony. And that certainly goes back long before 4G or 3G technologies. But there's still a role for landline phones. It's a niche application. So if you need to call a business or a shop or a place, then a landline still has a function. But for me to call another person, just in the same way that I use a mobile first for shopping, of course I use a mobile to call. Most of that wasn't true in 2010. Well, except maybe the bit about landlines. So back then, with 3G being a fantastic technology, but it wasn't quite enough to get us out and using mobile first all the time. And over that whole period, we've now formed this habit of turning to our mobile devices first, and then just using a fixed device when we need to, when we've got something more serious to do. So, as an example, you might pull your phone out and watch a whole lot of movie trailers or some YouTube content, but at the point where you actually want to sit down and digest, something end to end, a feature film, a TV series, then you'll do that on your Telstra TV or something with a larger form factor that's something you can really settle in. Similarly, you might casually email or, as I said, do some shopping on your phone, wherever you are. But if you need to sit down and do a report or edit a video, for instance, then of course that's going to wait until you get home, into the office, something like that. It's not something you can do out and about. But I guess overall, the change that we've had is that we go mobile first and then kind of fixed device when we need to. And that's a big change. So if we take 5G as part of that broader arc of the introduction of connectivity, data, wherever we are, where does 5G fit into that if we look forward? And so what I've got on the screen there is that's what 5G looks like in terms of the infrastructure. So there's two antennas there. It's a little hard to tell because of the perspective, but the 5G antenna is the bigger one, seemingly bigger one, closer to the shot. And that's basically what they look like. They're up and around. You'll see them on towers. Their rollout is progressing at a pace. The more distant antenna, the bigger one there, that's a 3G, 4G combined antenna. So it's interesting to me that the rate of change of technology has actually shrunk even the infrastructure that Telstra builds on our towers. So that antenna there, that 5G antenna, that's the sort of thing that you can actually heft with just one arm if you're feeling a bit strong. It's probably not OHS compliant to do it, but yeah, you can do that. They're also much lower power because they're getting much more efficient as well. So the sort of energy put out by this thing to connect to devices is in many ways a step down compared to what we had in 3G and 4G technology. It's getting more refined. It's getting more efficient. And so, with that in mind, I might actually look forward to what it is that we're going to do with 5G. And the way I'm going to do that is just spell out some of the projects that are happening around the world. And there's a big theme to this of taking systems and putting them online, but then really there's an automation angle to it, and it's all about higher data throughputs and highly responsive networks. In many ways, 5G is taking advantage of all of the cloud services that we have available online or for enterprises, and then just figuring out that last bit of connectivity and making sure that it's got the performance that allows you to take that mobile everywhere experience that we have and connect you to the cloud in a real-time fashion. So perhaps the easiest thing to think about when we've got a higher throughput, high performance 5G connection is in the arts and entertainment industry. And not just on the side where the content is delivered to you. Obviously, when you're out and watching YouTube, Netflix, I've talked about that a little bit, you'll be able to do that with less lag, fewer buffering events, higher quality, and so on and so forth. So that's really important. But more interestingly, perhaps, the cost for creators and innovators to set up your own video and video production facility has dropped dramatically over that same sort of time period. And so actually, I'm a YouTube addict. I like to watch a lot of creators online. And you can see that self-distributing video online and doing all the production yourself is now completely within the reach of anyone who wants to get into it. And it's entirely reasonable. In fact, perhaps even a smart career choice if you're wanting to head yourself into media is to go sort of the DIY route first. So the guy in the picture here, it's a stock photo. I don't know who he is. And it's obviously a pretty impressive setup. That's not that sort of thing. But the sort of equipment available to even small-time producers now is just incredible. And actually, mobile devices are a big part of that as well. You can shoot higher quality videos and photos and actually develop an entirely online workflow. So if you're out and about and you're taking photos on your device or videos, or even just using as the audio pickup or whatever it is, all of that content just gets immediately synced up to a cloud backup service. And then when you need to bring it all together and edit it again, you just bring that back down to the device wherever you are. So that sort of fully online workflow is facilitated by high-speed broadband. And of course, with 5G, it just increases the reliability of that service, increases the sorts of higher quality captures that you can make, and so on and so forth. But then if we come back to the guy in the picture, even at the big end of town, from news media to TV to cinema, even though they're not likely to use mobile devices, they nevertheless have a delay sometimes in the capture of the content out in the field and then getting it back into the studio for editing and so on. So the availability of high-speed, widespread mobile broadband goes into all of those sorts of areas as well, and allows, again, that online workflow where you can just take the content from the field and then make it very, very rapidly available to the editing team wherever they happen to be. Sticking on entertainment for a moment, there's another fascinating change happening with mobile devices right now, and it's driven by this incredible folding technology. So that's a Samsung Galaxy Fold there, and look, if you haven't seen a folding screen device yet, I highly recommend, if you're able to, or perhaps next time you're able to go out and get into a shop, to go and have a look at them, because there's something quite incredible about interacting with one of these folding screen devices. I'm really interested in this because there's this huge renaissance into kind of innovation in mobile phone form factors. Back in the 3G, late 2G days, there was incredible innovation in what a mobile phone actually looked like. You know, was it going to be a flip? Was it going to be a slide? Did it have two screens? All this sort of stuff. And in the last 10 years, that's kind of all gone away, and it's just a thinner, lighter slate. But all of a sudden, with folding screen technology, it's back on again, and I love it. And so, although I mentioned earlier that maybe you can't do serious viewing when you're out and about, I think that whole thing changes if you've got a folding device, because if you can fold that down into something that's a little bit like a phone, might fit in your pocket, and then unfold it again later, and you get this luxurious sort of high-resolution display, then perhaps it becomes a primary viewing tool, even for feature-length movies and all sorts of stuff. There's a whole fascinating kind of area there that we're going to get to see over the next couple of years with what is possible when you've got a large format device that is actually extremely portable, and I'm excited about it. It's also really interesting from a digital creator point of view. So now all of a sudden you've got the possibility to take an app that you're designing, but build two experiences around it. Build an experience that's the hyper-portable experience that you want someone to be able to just pull out of their pocket and interact with really quickly. But then, of course, this big screen view, and particularly coupled with a 5G connection, access to extremely high data rates, that's a fascinating idea, and I'm sure we'll see lots of innovation on that front as well, taking advantage of these cool new devices. On the subject of kind of innovation, we've just debuted an augmented reality app ourselves. It's built into the Telstra AFL Live app, and it's fascinating because there's no way that we would have ever thought of doing something like this on older hardware with poorer connectivity. This sort of experience is only really possible because of the advances in both the sorts of connections that devices have got available to, but also just the underlying power of the hardware. So augmented reality is an incredible way to mix virtual experiences into the real world. So in this version here, you can take your device and it uses the camera to pick up a surface in front of you. And then it can, as you can see there, project the players out on the table and merge those into the real world. Then you can pull up some stats and things like that as the game goes on. Looking forward, of course, you can think about, well, what would a video experience of this look like, and how would that work? So you can imagine that if, for instance, we had trackers available for all of the players of the game, you might be able to craft your own football experience where you could come down to and kind of follow along from a particular player's vantage point, and then go and do it again from another one. So in fact, it then has a replay quality to it as well. And that's a really interesting idea to think about. And you can have an entirely new experience over and over again. And I think those sorts of things are something that we'll see happen as both the actual device hardware and the connectivity behind it allows you to very quickly go get that video feed from out of the cloud, bring it down to a device, and let the user remix the way that they want to watch that content again and again and again. So if we get out of the entertainment part and go look at some industry, some business as well, we can think even bigger picture. So automation is a really big deal, especially industrial automation. This is another one of these big factors, along with mobile broadband in general, that's going to really reshape our society. It's incredible to think about. And overseas, it's often talked about against the backdrop of, for instance, highly automated vehicle assembly lines. And obviously, we don't have those in Australia anymore. But there are lots of industries that we have here. This is equally applicable, whether it's farming, forestry, around Bendigo, of course, there's amazing food production. And so a lot of the underlying automation technology that is talked about for smart factories is common to all of these areas, although, of course, when they talk about it in Europe or in the States, it's often about vehicle assembly as being one of the first ones. Rob touched in his presentation very briefly on the extended range that Telstra has with the IoT network for connecting up really low power devices. So you can put some sensors out there and start understanding all of what's going on. But that gets you to a dashboard. That probably gets you to some important data. And here, with the Data Hub project, there's a fascinating piece of work there about how that can be shared securely and privately and made a lot of sense of. But I guess that doesn't solve the problem for full automation, where you want to be able to connect something up to something else and do that complete automation flow, where you can bring an entire assembly line, production plant online and have some of the decisions happening autonomously without necessarily needing human input all of the time. And so that's into 5G, one of the things that it directly facilitates as well. So in those scenarios, when we're looking into those future ones, automation, one of the tricks with it is that industrial automation, as it's been built so far, doesn't use networks that look very much like the internet or other IP type networks that we're used to today. So there's some fundamental work that needs to happen to make those things able to be connected up wirelessly. They're Ethernet based, for instance. They have very strict timing requirements. They might expect a pulse from one device to another to show that it's got some sort of keep alive. These are not normally the sorts of things that you would consider putting across a kind of a wide area network, let alone a wireless network like 5G. But the next version of 5G is being designed to do exactly this. So our network partner, Ericsson, who supplies parts of the Telstra network, they've been doing some work to demo the ability to take these industrial control protocols and put them directly over a 5G link so that you can, in fact, control a robotic arm or something else like that over the mobile network. Now, it's not the wide area mobile network like you might expect. It's not going to be mixed up with all of the other data from the YouTube and Netflix users of the world. It is kept quite separate and as a kind of private slice of the network. But that's a really interesting and fascinating thing to do. It's a really big deal, especially for the mobile parts of that automation. So whether that's robotics on a production line or delivery trolleys in a fulfillment centre, so the sorts of sorting and packing going on at Amazon, Ozpost, those sorts of places, or even a tractor in a field. All of those parts really benefit from being mobile and being wireless because it allows you to bring that automation to more places. And so the next version of 5G, which is being standardised right now, really targets those sorts of things as well. There's some other really basic things that you can do around an automation system, which are incredibly important. So, for instance, where you have people working alongside some of this technology, a little bit like in the shot here, safety cutouts are incredibly important. And so a really good way to do that is off a video feed that can automatically detect where people are in relation to the equipment, and then with very low latency, send in some sort of interrupt or signal cutout to control the system. So lots of fascinating stuff there. As I mentioned, the software innovation in this is really advanced compared to how we used to run a network too. Rob mentioned that we deployed the IoT features into 4G just with a software upgrade. So that's essentially how we're going to go from here forward. So getting these advanced features into the network is really something we can do over time with software deployments. The picture there shows a shot of the coverage of 5G in and around Bendigo. And that's where we're at. And that's quite good, especially for a network that's only just had its first birthday. So there's obviously a lot more to do. We have a target to have some 75% of the population with 5G coverage by next year. So the build is happening at a pace, and the technology will be available in more places more often. But as I said, it's really part of this broader arc of 4G bleeding into 5G and all the things that it can do. The last bit that I might touch on, Rob foreshadowed slightly, which is about some really cutting edge work that we're doing in connected vehicle technology in Australia. So while as I mentioned, we don't have vehicle assembly manufacturing in this country anymore. We do certainly still have some of the most advanced road systems, though. And so actually, Australia is a really good place to be doing connected vehicle work, even though the vehicles are inevitably imported. For example, just to go back a little ways, CityLink in Melbourne was one of the, well, in fact, it was the first completely stop-free toll road deployed in the world. And some other really basic stuff about our infrastructure. So, for instance, the majority of signalised intersections in Australia are online. They're connected up. Now, that's not true in broad sections of Europe and the United States, for example, where their intersections just, although they've got globes and lamps and different colours just like ours do, they just run on timers. They have some connected ones, but in Australia, I guess we're very lucky that there's been that investment to make sure that all of that stuff is actually already connected. And so that means that this is a really good place to be doing some cutting-edge connected vehicle work. So that vehicle is one of two that we built in conjunction with Lexus Australia and the Victorian government. That project ran last year. And those vehicles were connected to each other so that they could do some safety alerts, and that's via a direct link based on mobile technology. But also they're connected via the Telstra network to other sorts of infrastructure like digital overhead signage and also upcoming traffic lights. So this vehicle, when it was approaching an intersection, was able to start making judgments about whether it was going to be safe to proceed or whether the vehicle was in danger of running a red light. And it was able to communicate that to other vehicles in the area, the other vehicle of this sort in the area. And of course, that's really important too, because it's all well and good for you to know if you're going to run a red light, but equally important if you know someone nearby is going to. One of the really important parts of this project was that we were able to stand this up on the existing Telstra mobile network. So we did a lot of testing in regional Victoria, particularly concentrated in an area sort of from Geelong up through to Ballarat. And that's because it was using that software upgrade, we were able to take some of the innovation that we developed for this project in connecting vehicles up to the mobile network and rapidly deploy that wherever we needed to without investing in new hardware. And 5G is the same. So that's a really interesting thing. And I think it again goes to that idea of making sure that this technology is available everywhere. So that was a brief tour through some of the, I guess, advances and a glimpse into the future of what 5G might bring. I posed a question in one of the summaries for this talk, which was a little bit around when will we get there? And I think the answer to that is, of course, both now and soon as well. We're rolling out that 5G technology and we're going to upgrade that to the later versions of 5G. So I've mentioned a couple of times, I've said, this version of 5G, that version of 5G. The hardware that we put out there is forward compatible. So as we go out, we build those new features in. We also get to update the 4G network as well. And then we're ready and set for all of this digital innovation. So I think it's super exciting to be building this here. And I think it's equally exciting to be doing it right here in Victoria and Australia, and I'm really lucky to get to work on it. So I think that's probably enough out of me. And Alicia, I might hand back over to you, and we'll see if we've got any questions for Rob or I.
Yes. Thank you very much, David. A great presentation and a great exploration of the importance of digital connectivity for that digital inclusion perspective, but also social inclusion as well. And we've changed the way we use our devices so much. And when you touched on that idea of folding technology, we're only going to continue to rely on that technology into the future. So that access is just so important. So we look forward to welcoming both Rob back into the discussion now as well. So thank you very much. And we do have some questions that have come in from our audience. So we'll dive into those if that's all right with you both. Rob, this is a question for you. You mentioned devices used to monitor water technology as an example. Are these devices being developed by Telstra or with a partner?
With a partner.
All right. So can you shed any more light on that from a partner perspective, or is that's all you can say at the moment?
I'm trying to remember. I'm racking my brain to remember the name of them at the moment, and it was actually with a partner and in conjunction with Queensland, one of the Queensland departments as well.
All right. Thank you. David, is there local R&D happening with 5G technology?
Yeah, quite a lot. So I mentioned that obviously we've built some world first stuff at Telstra, but I think it's also worth mentioning programs like Melbourne Connect. So that's a recent collaboration between Telstra and the University of Melbourne. And we're supervising some, I guess, primary research, some student projects at the moment, but we might also look into some PhDs, masters, postdocs. Very much focused on 5G technology. So I think the answer is yes. There is local R&D happening for sure. It's not just something that we kind of buy off the shelf and bring in from overseas.
No, it's got to be made to fit for us and for our communities here in Australia.
Yeah, it does. And maybe just on that, there are some particular challenges with this stuff in Australia as well. We tend to build our networks a little different, and part of that is regional coverage. Rob mentioned before the hundreds of kilometres we get out of the IoT network, and there's no other operator in the world that's really pushing that as hard as we are. So it is important to actually do some of this primary research in Australia.
All right, thank you for that. Another question that has come in around the Internet of Things. How do you think the Internet of Things will help with climate change, bushfires, flooding, etc.? Because you touched on weather and farmers being able to have access to better technology there, Rob.
Yeah, well, in fact, there's some of the projects that I didn't mention. One of the interesting ones that we're working on at the moment now is in terms which relates particularly to flooding. Actually, measuring a river is really difficult to do. It's dangerous, but understanding what's flowing through the water, how high the water is, and so on. And a lot of these rivers are quite remote as well. We have a program going which we call, it's a horrible name, contactless water flow monitoring, where we're actually taking computer vision, a remote computer camera. The processing is done on a computer that sits on the edge, and it can analyse the patterns on the water and actually just send back the height and the flow of that water over our IoT network, so that remote communities can actually understand, what's happening in those rivers, and we can feed that into flood models and so on. So that's one piece. And I think in terms of bushfires, incredibly useful, right? As you've seen, there's been some announcements done lately by one of the charitable foundations where we're looking to see whether we can fireproof Australia, but just being able to have remote sensors, being able to understand, whether there's smoke detected in the air, or remote cameras that, again, can do that edge processing, but can detect, heat flares is going to make significant differences if we can detect fires earlier rather than them burning out.
Have a very significant role in managing natural disaster in Australia, so I'd say that's a yes to that question. Will the wireless networks make NBN redundant? If either of you would like to take that question, perhaps David, to kick us off there.
Yeah, tricky question, although not. I mean, the answer is no. As a wireless engineer, I'd love to be able to say yes, but of course it's not the case. And I think it goes to that little bit about what the way we reach for a mobile device first versus other things that we need to go and do in front of a laptop with a fixed connection, something like NBN. And so there's always going to be a blend of the two. I think what we'll find is that there might be a shift over time towards more mobile-centric stuff, but at no point does any of that make something like the NBN redundant. You still absolutely need both, because there's a certain amount of heavy lifting that you can only do with the capacity of a fixed network. So unfortunately for me, no, it doesn't make the NBN redundant.
All right, we'll be having the NBN for some time yet. Rob, how can you connect devices when you can't sometimes get your Telstra coverage in the first place? So how does that work, or how can it work?
Oh, well, it's probably more a field of David's, but it is a question of physics and mathematics. When it primarily relates to an IoT device, uses a fraction of the data that a voice call uses, and that's what we're really doing when with the IoT network, is we're trading off the amount of data that can be transferred and the latency involved, and with IoT device, it can try a couple of times as well. And that's why you can certainly connect an NB-IoT device, well, as we've said, 120 kilometres away from a tower, which I don't know what's the average for a good phone call, David?
Yeah, nothing like that. But yeah, absolutely. It gets you, over another set of hills. It gets you through another brick wall. It just extends the coverage that much further for those sorts of devices.
All right, and then I guess what's the rough latency comparison then between 4G and 5G if you're trying to measure that?
Yeah, so there's a few different aspects to this. In the simplest version, it's maybe an order of magnitude reduction, but I guess that's just the headline. 4G can be actually quite a low latency service. So in a lab with 4G, to put some numbers to it, we can get 20, 30 milliseconds round trip time across a 4G network. 5G can do much better than that, but I think the really important thing is 5G, as I mentioned with the Connected Vehicle project, we can teach it what the needs of the application are. So rather than worrying so much about just saying it's low latency, what we can say is, well, this is a connected car. It needs to make sure that every packet is treated with low latency. And that's a real difference between what 5G can do and what 4G can do. We can make it sort of aware of what's the needs of this application, make sure that it's served correctly. With that said, we can also tune 5G up so that if the application demands it, we can get down to single-digit latency. So instead of 20 to 30, we can be down in sort of the 1 to 5 milliseconds. So that's quite impressive. But the real power is being application-aware rather than just one-size-fits-all.
You both touched on privacy in your presentations. As we grow, our reliance on data grows. What about hackers? How dangerous is it, is a question that's come in about having all of this information online or being able to access it. You also talked a little bit about hiving off parts of the data to make it private for just one person, but perhaps, Rob, if you'd be able to explore a little bit about how we could manage that in future.
Yeah, look, and I think there's a couple of pieces to that, Alicia. So the first thing, the privacy piece, is probably different to hackers and security. So from the privacy piece, we can design, and in fact, the hub is designed to identify pieces of information that can identify an individual. And so from the way that the data patterns and the hub is implemented, we can control that, separate out that piece through tokenization and so on. Then we also have a number of technologies available now where all the data is encrypted, whether it's in transit when we're moving it around or when it's stored, it's all encrypted. And now we have some really interesting confidential computing technologies that we're able to apply. One of them is enclave technologies, where it's a special type of processor where you can actually now have data encrypted while it's in use. And then the other side to this is the network itself. One of the great advantages of owning a network is that data isn't on the general internet, and we understand who the user on the end of the network is authenticated. And then there's finally one other thing, one of the really, real uses we're seeing of artificial intelligence today is that when you have the data in a concentrated place like this, you can understand how data is used in its secure and normal sense. So the computers themselves can actually now tell us when there is unusual activity occurring on data.
Considerable safeguards there, I think, to help people understand that their privacy is going to be protected.
Privacy has been a very big thing for Telstra. It's since its inception, I think. Right, it's very, very frustrating in some ways, but yeah, there's a lot of checks and balances we have to go through to do anything with our data on our network.
A great focus on that. So I think we're heading into our last question now, which is, when is 5G going to be more widespread? David, probably one for you.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Look, I mentioned a little bit of that. As I said, it's already available in a number of cities across Australia. and we do have that target of a very reasonable proportion of the populated area connected up next year. But I think it's also worth mentioning that we haven't finished building our 4G network either. So in a sense, we will continue to build our 5G network over the next decade or even longer, and it will just become progressively available in more and more places. But certainly we have some very aggressive targets to meet in getting that base level of coverage out there. And for a network, as I said, that's only just had its first birthday, it is already available in a wide variety of places, particularly cities and urban centres right across Australia.
All right, well, thank you both very much for your time today. Great presentations, very interesting, excellent, amazing examples, I guess, of how we'll be using the internet and technology into the future. So we really appreciate you both joining us, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It was fun.
All right. And thank you for joining us at home via the wonders of technology. Today's presentation certainly does get you thinking about how technology will continue to shape our lives. I hope you have enjoyed today's session. Once you've registered for one BIIF session, you can watch back any of our previous sessions at your own leisure. Take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.